Well, hello, good morning, and welcome. Let me get this fixed. I think we'll wait a little while as more people come in, but welcome. Okay, let's see. Okay, welcome. Thank you for coming and joining me today. I'm going to shut us down so that we can just look at the pictures, which are going to go along with the stories that I'm going to tell. So let's give it another minute to see if anyone else shows up. We do have another minute, but thank you for spending time with me on this Saturday morning. And I just want to talk a little bit about, we're going to begin with a little bit about actually the Venus in the sky, and then I'm going to tell you some stories that relate to what's going on. So once again, welcome. And I want to thank you all for coming. I love sharing my stories with you. So I'm going to begin. Oh, maybe I will wait a minute as more and more people seem to be coming in. It is just 12 o'clock. Okay, well, let's go. So we are, as we all know, we're all living in transformational times. And as humanity evolves, because that's what's happening, this is evolving our consciousness, our collective consciousness. Our work is really to reconnect with our place in Mother Earth's biosphere. We used to fit in. We used to be part of the energetic of our beautiful planet, and we removed ourselves from it. And we are very far removed from it. And now our job is to get back in touch with it and find our place once again. And so this also includes working consciously with all the planetary energies that astrology works with. But while astrological knowledge helps us meet the changes and challenges of life, if any of you have had readings, you know that astrology can give you a wonderful heads up about energies coming to you. I really believe that stories can help us ground in these energies better, because stories speak to our hearts and they wake up our imaginations. So today we're going to evoke Venus as a star or a planet. She's really a planet, but we've called her a star for so long. But also we're going to talk about the archetypal energy that she represents, which is love and wisdom and the divine feminine. Because while the moon really is about timing rhythms and tides and, you know, the rhythms of life, the unfolding of life, Venus symbolizes more the feminine, right brain, yin aspects of life, the way we magnetize and attract energies so that we connect to our lives. And the solar feminine does exemplify the right brain feminine consciousness. And it's interesting because while our culture sees the sun as masculine, that's been since the Greeks, which is so much of how the Greeks and the Romans, we really base a lot of our culture on what we learned from them. There were many cultures in the past that saw the sun as feminine. In Egypt, you had Hathor and Sekhmet. And in Celtic countries, you had Graini and Ane. And then the Japanese, of course, had Amaterasu, sorry. And the Germans have Sol or Suna. So lots of feminine energy. And at least according to Jung, when the sun is feminine, that means that the basis of our ego consciousness comes from the right brain. And since we have, as a culture, the masculine sun, we see consciousness in a very left brain masculine way. but that's got to change. And I think that this Venus in Capricorn, the retrograde that we're going through right now very much speaks to how we're going to start to integrate back into our culture a more feminine right brain consciousness. So welcome everyone. I hear you still coming in. So first of all, let's ask, why do we care about the Venus cycle? Because of all the planets, the Venus is almost the most consistent, if you will. And in ancient times, sky watchers have looked to Venus either in her morning star phase or evening star phase. And pretty much all around the world in ancient times, the morning star phase, she was more of a warrioress. Whereas in her evening star phase, she's much more the lover or the wisdom aspect. Especially the Mayans saw it that way. And I'll talk about different books if you're interested more in the astrology of all of this. So, as I was saying, it's time. The creative intelligence, whoever created us and created the universe, in a way, it seems as if it's preparing us for this radical transformation of our human consciousness. So, okay. So anyway, let's look at this. First of all, this picture that I'm showing you is a picture from probably either 2004 or 2012. Every 130 years or so, the plane of Venus and the plane of the sun come together, and you can actually see Venus go across the face of the sun during those times. And once in every 130 years, Venus does that twice. She does it in 8-year cycles because the whole Venus cycle is 8 years. So in 2004, for the first time in 130 years or so, Venus went across the face of the sun. I saw that here in Whitford, Rhode Island, down at the beach at sunrise. And then she went across the face of the sun again in 2012, which my tribe and I saw out in Vegas. And to me, here's a picture of the solar feminine in so many ways. So today at 7:48 p.m. Eastern time and at 4:48 p.m. Pacific time, and any place in between and outside of that, Venus kisses the sun. That's what we talk, but we won't see it, okay? Because Venus is no longer on that plane with the sun. She won't be there for another 120 years or so. So let's start to look at this. So there was an evening star. I don't know if all of you went out and saw beautiful Venus. I think this is a photograph from Gemini Brett, because there's an owl there. And I wondered where I had gotten this beautiful picture from. But there's Venus as the evening star, and we've just ended her evening star phase. And if you've gone out at night and looked in the western sky for the last 9 months, you've seen her beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And now she's disappeared. And when she goes retrograde, she is between the earth and the sun. And so here we are right now today, if you can see this big star right here, it's called the interior conjunction of Venus. And it's when Venus appears to go retrograde. Now, for those of you who don't know astrology very well, from our point of view, as we orbit the sun, planets look like they go backwards because our orbit passes them. So because Venus is between us and the sun, she doesn't get very far away from the sun. She only gets about 48 degrees either before or after the sun. And right now, as she disappears, she's disappeared for about 10 days, and she'll come out and she'll become a morning star. And then she'll travel around, and then she'll disappear behind the sun. And that's about a 60 or a 90-day process, whereas this is only about a week or two over here between us and the sun. But when she disappears behind the sun, she's gone for much longer, and then she appears as an evening star. And so there's this wonderful rhythm. It's a 9.5-month rhythm, okay? And for the whole, she goes around the sun once every year and 0.6. 1 year and 6.6. And it's interesting because this 1.6, it's very mathematical, and you can see it all over the earth. It's sort of like one of the perfect proportions. Ancient cultures built their temples with that. We see it in nature all the time. It's sort of the value that is the spiral. And so the beautiful part about us connecting back into Mother Earth's biosphere is that we see that as above, so below. It actually is truth. And if we see it in a mathematical way, we can see the resonance there. And it's interesting too, because what happens is she makes a 5-pointed star. Okay. And so here we are down, this was in June of 2020. She was a morning star in Gemini. And so she went into the world and says, I'm going to think about new ways to think about things. And then she came up here, and then last March in 2021, she became an evening star. That's when she disappeared behind the sun. And she said, what am I going to do about it? And then so here we are up here in Capricorn. If you see up here at the top of the star, today she's going to conjunct the sun and form a whole new, what we call Venus star point. And then she'll be there for 9.5 months, and then she'll disappear. And then in October, she will start a new evening star phase in Libra. And so it goes around, okay, the star, as you can see it, and it takes 8 years, because each point wants to have a morning star phase and an evening star phase. And this is what she makes. If we drew this is the cycle that she makes in the sky. And it's so interesting because Venus is always associated with a rose. And here we have the rose pattern. So Venus is associated with the 5-pointed star, which so many people are afraid of. They say it's a witchy symbol, but it's the symbol of Venus. And if any of you listened to my story about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, on Sir Gawain's shield, he had a pentacle, and it stood for all the values and the virtues that he believed in. And because he was known as the Knight of the Goddess. So anyway, just quickly, some Venus qualities are love and beauty and sexuality and wisdom, especially embodied wisdom. Of course, she represents relationships and connections because she's the great connector. She also in astrology represents values and money and fertility. Now, she represents not only what is of value to us, but what we value. Venus also is sort of the queen of the arts. She and the muses hang out together. And so Venus represents our creative abilities. And she also is associated with peace. Her dove is the dove of the Holy Spirit in Christianity, as a matter of fact. The dove of peace, balance, equilibrium, harmony, since she's also the ruler of Libra. Just as in Taurus, she's more of the sensual connection that we have. Now, right now, she's in Capricorn. And Capricorn is sometimes, well, for the longest time now, it's been associated with patriarchy, the father. We think about it as representing corporations and the social structures, okay? But it's much deeper. Capricorn is called the sea goat because in the old astrology, it was a mountain goat, but it had the tail of a fish. And it's a feminine sign, it's an earth sign. And so it's about manifestation. And because it's cardinal or action oriented, because it turns the seasons at the winter solstice, it's action oriented. And it's embodied by the energy of Saturn, which is about structure and our foundations and our traditions and the necessary rules of life when we all gather together. And also, of course, Saturn is associated with time. Capricorn and Saturn are both associated with responsibility, with maturity, with steadfastness. And of course, there's the social institutions. And in the East, it's the sign of Dharma. What is our social responsibility? But also, Capricorn is related to the idea of sovereignty. And I'm going to tell you a story about sovereignty in a minute. And then, of course, we're going to switch Capricorn and stop saying that she's the sign of patriarchy, hopefully. And we're going to go back to the whole idea of the Council of Grandmothers. I don't know if you all know it, but Ben Franklin and our founding fathers, they went to the Iroquois nation. They had a confederacy. Hiawatha, the myth of Hiawatha speaks of that formation. And it's so interesting because they didn't mention the Council of Grandmothers, of course, but the whole idea is that in this Iroquois nation, many, about 6 different tribes were part of this nation, and there were many different chiefs, but the grandmothers, the Council of Grandmothers ruled them. And so the chiefs couldn't go to war unless the Council of Grandmothers said it was okay. They were the ultimate authority. And hopefully we will get back to something like that, where wisdom keepers will be, once again, have authority. And it's also the whole idea of ancestors. So just a quick look. We're not going to look at the astrology too much. As I said, I want to get on to the stories. But today at 7:48 p.m. Eastern time, where I am, Venus and the sun come together at 18 plus degrees. And so we say it's 19. And the image for that, there's a symbol for every degree of the 360 in the zodiac, is a little girl carrying a market basket out on an errand. And this image applies that even though we feel like we're young, okay, we still can do things that go beyond our expectations. Especially here in America, we baby our children. People don't grow up until probably their first Saturn return, which is 28 to 30. But in most other cultures, young children do help out. And that's one of the most important things we can do for our children. We can teach them from the time they're little that they have to help us. They help us in the home. They help us. They have responsibilities. And it helps them grow into that mature, grown-up citizen that we hope they'll be. The other thing I just want to talk quickly about or look at is that these are called the nodes. This is the South Node. It's in Sagittarius. It's about to go into Scorpio. The South Node is sort of our old karma that we have to release. And it's things that we're good at, but we've gotten kind of lazy with them. And so for the past 19 months, while we've been stuck in our homes, we've had to give up some of our old beliefs. And the North Node has been in Gemini. It goes backwards from 30 degrees to 0 degrees. So that's why it's about to enter Taurus North Node and Scorpio South Node. But right now it's still at 0 degrees, Gemini and Aquarius and Sagittarius. Anyway, just quickly, all of the planets are in between the nodes, except for these 2 things down here, which you can ignore right now. And so that makes it very karmic. There's something very faded about the idea that all of these planets are contained within the nodes. And the nodes show us our destiny. And so it's saying it's really time for us to grow up and realize that we have to take responsibility for our own life, because, Big Daddy or government is no longer going to take care of us. So that was just a quick astrological look. What Venus in Capricorn retrograde says is, let us reevaluate our cultural values. Okay, let us think about what is important. Let us bring into the culture those feminine values of love and beauty and harmony and peace. And what are our values? Where's your 5-pointed star? What are the things you value? Do you even think about, I'm going to act out of my values? Well, now it's time to do that. So anyway, these are just a few books. If you're interested, Ariel Gutman has written a book all about what she calls the Venus star points. And those are those points of the 5-pointed star where the new moon, where the morning star and the evening star begin. Adam Gainsbourg wrote a book called The Light of Venus, in which he explores the whole cycle. He has very many more steps. And Sasha Rose Benedetti, she teaches classes on Venus wisdom. So let's talk about some stories. We're talking about what do we need to bring in? What are the values that we want in our society? And we talk a lot about sovereignty. I've heard a lot of people talk about the idea that we have to gain our sovereignty. Now, sovereignty has to do with self-government, and usually we think about it as a country, but also each of us needs sovereignty, and especially women. We have to belong to ourselves. And this is a story from King Arthur's, from the Middle Ages, but it's a Arthurian story. And it's about how when a culture is missing something, when a culture is leaving something out, a story forms around it so that you can begin to see what you need to bring into the culture. So the marriage of Dame Ragnall and Sir Gawain. Once upon a time, Arthur was out riding with some of his companions and they were hunting. And Arthur got ahead of the rest of his men and he brought down a deer. And he got off his horse and he was in a clearing and he was dressing his kill, as they say, when all of a sudden a giant knight appeared and said, "Ha, King Arthur, I have finally found you alone. I've been waiting to do this. I am going to kill you because you have, you've taken something away from me. You've taken some land away from me and I have a grudge against you." And meanwhile, Arthur said, "Well, that's not very knightly. You're all dressed up in your knight outfit. And here I am only in my hunting outfit. And it really isn't fair." And so the knight had to agree to that. And he said, "Okay, I'll tell you what. Come back in a year to this very place and answer a riddle. And if you have the right answer to the riddle, I won't kill you. But if you don't know the answer to the riddle, I will chop off your head." They were really big on cutting off heads back then, the Celts. They thought that was the seed of wisdom. Anyway, Arthur agreed and he wrote out and he was quite depressed. And his nephew, Sir Gawain, who often takes the place of the king in many of these adventures, noticed it. And he asked him what was the matter. And so Arthur told him what had happened with this giant knight. And so they talked it over and they decided to ride out in different directions. And wherever they went, they were going to ask men and women if they could answer the riddle. And this was the riddle that the giant asked of Arthur. What do women desire most in all the world? And so off they went. And they received many answers, which they put down in 2 books. And some people said that women desired beautiful clothes, to be fairly arrayed, as they said in the old days. And some said that women loved to be adored. They loved to be praised. Some said that they loved sensual, passionate men. And some said, jewels would do the trick. Some said one thing, some said another. And they both came back. But Arthur wasn't sure that they had the answers. So with only 1 month left to solve the riddle, needing to meditate, the king, he rode into the forest. And there he was surprised because he met the most ugly hag that mankind had ever seen. Her face was red. She had a snotty nose. She had a wide mouth with big yellow tusks hanging down over her lower lip. She had a thick neck and her breasts were shriveled up and they hung low. But after his first horrified glance, he noticed that she had a lute strung over her shoulders and she was riding a beautifully saddled horse. And it didn't seem right that such an ugly hag should have this gift of music. Well, the hag wrote directly to the king and greeted him. And then she quickly told him, "None of your answers that you and Gawain found were going to do you any good. If I don't help you, you're dead," she said. "So grant me, Sir King, only one thing, and I'll save your life, or else you'll lose your head." "What do you mean, lady?" King Arthur said. "Tell me why my life is in your hands, and I'll do anything you ask." And so the hideous creature said, "You have to let me marry Sir Gawain. And I promise that if your life is not saved by my answer, you don't have to keep your promise. But if my answer saves your life, then I want to wed Gawain. Now, hurry up and choose quickly, because if you don't, you're dead." Well, the king was horrified at this choice and told the hag, well, he couldn't really answer for him because he'd have to ask Gawain. And so the lady replied, well, go home then and ask Sir Gawain, because though I'm foul, I can be very gay. Now the king returned to the castle, and when he told Gawain of the lady's demand, Gawain, of course, answered that he would rather marry her than see King Arthur dead. And of course, this proved once again what a great knight Gawain was. So the king went back into the woods and found out that the hag was called Dame Ragnall. And so he said, okay, my nephew has agreed to marry you. And so she said, sir, now you will know what women desire most of high and low. This is the prime desire of all our fantasy. We desire of men above all manner of thing to have the sovereignty. So of course, this was the only answer that would save the king. But he didn't want to give in right away. And so when he rode back to that clearing and the giant knight was there, he went through every single answer that he and Gawain had gotten from the books. But the knight laughed and said, nope, nope, none of those answers are right. Bend over, I'm going to cut your head off. Well, finally, King Arthur had to give him the answer that Dame Ragnall had told him. And he said, what women desire most is to have the sovereignty. And of course, the knight was very upset. And he was the stepbrother of Dame Ragnall, by the way. And he said, she's betrayed me. And off he went because he couldn't kill the king. Well, King Arthur met Dame Ragnall on his way back to Camelot. And she said, okay, I want to go marry him right away. And so King Arthur arrived back at Camelot with this ugly hag at his side. Now, Guinevere wanted her to marry off in a side chapel, but Ragnall wouldn't have it. She said, no, I want to be married in the cathedral, and I want to have a big party, and I want to have a big wedding. So as she went to get off a horse, Sir Gawain came up to her, and with great courtesy, he stepped forward and he pledged his troth. And Dame Ragnall said, God have mercy, for your sake, I wish I were a fair woman, because you have such goodwill and are willing to marry me. Well, all the ladies of the court, many of them were lovers of Sir Gawain, and all the knights, they felt so sorry because his bride was so ugly. And because she had insisted on the wedding taking place right away, there they were. They went to a high mass and they had a banquet. But at the banquet, she gobbled up all the meat and she drank all the mead. And everyone was deathly worried for Gawain as they took off for the marriage chamber. Well, that night in bed, Gawain couldn't bring himself at first to turn around and face her appetizing snout. But after a time, she said to him, Sir Gawain, since I've wed you, show me your courtesy in bed. It can't rightfully be denied. If I were fair, you would not behave this way. You're not valuing our marriage. Now, for Arthur's sake, come on, kiss me at least. I pray you, do this. Let's see how quick you can be. Well, Gawain collected all of his courage and kindness. He said, I'll do more. I'll do more than simply kiss you. But when he turned to her, he saw that she was the fairest creature he had ever seen. And she said, what do you will? And he said, sweet Jesus, who are you? And she said, well, I'm your wife. And why are you being so unkind? And he said, lady, I am to blame. I didn't know. You are beautiful to my sight. Whereas today, you were the foulest sight my eyes had ever seen. To have you thus, it pleases me well. And he embraced her and began kissing, and they made great joy of each other. But after they had made love, she said, Gawain, my beauty will not hold. You may have me thus, but only for half the day. And so the question is, do you want me fair at night in your bed, but ugly and foul during the day before all your friends? Or shall I be beautiful during the day and only ugly at night in bed? Gawain was in a dilemma. He said, alas, this is a hard choice. To have you fair at night, no more, that wouldn't be fair. It would grieve my heart. You're so beautiful. But if I say you should be fair during the day, then I have to deal with you in bed when you're ugly. I don't know what to do. And he thought about it, but then he said, since this involves you more than me, why don't you do what you want? What do you desire? I leave the choice in your hand, for I love you more than my own life. And that's when the lady said, sweet, you are such a wonderful knight. You'll be blessed above all the knights in the world, for you have released me from the enchantment that my stepmother put on me. And now you shall have me fair and bright both day and night. And then she told her delighted husband how her stepmother had enchanted her and how she was condemned to remain under that ugly shape until the best knight in the land should wed her and yield to her the sovereignty of her own choice. Thus I was deformed, she said, and you, courteous Gwaine, have given me the sovereignty for certain. So kiss me, my dear, even here and now, and let us be glad and have great cheer. And so they made joy out of mind. And they stayed in bed for so long that Arthur and Guinevere in the court began to worry that Ragnall had eaten Gwaine up. And so they came to the door and knocked. But when Gwaine answered the door, there was that most beautiful woman with him. And so everyone was happy and rejoiced at the marriage of Dame Ragnall and Sir Gawain. So there's a story about sovereignty. And the thing is that in the ancient times, the land had sovereignty, and especially for the Celts, the king or the queen had to marry the land because the land itself, Mother Earth, had to have sovereignty. When a king governed something, he had to take care of the land, not just the people, but the land. And as the Middle Ages went on, that was becoming less and less important. And so this story came into being. And of course, as we women know, we do need the sovereignty, just as our feminine right brain consciousness needs to be the foundation of what we do and how we make decisions. I'll tell you more. You can read more about things like this in my book, but we'll talk about that later. So I hope you're sitting back, relaxing. I'm going to take a little drink of water because I have another story to tell. So if we look at Capricorn as the patriarchy, if we look, usually we often talk about Capricorn as the father, Cancer, the opposite sign is the mother. With Venus going retrograde in Capricorn and starting a new Venus star point, it's about how do we deal with patriarchy? How do we deal with the father? How do we deal as women with all of the patriarchal rules that have been imposed on us through the hundreds and hundreds of years that preceded this? And one of the things that we have to do as women is we have to leave the father's house. And there's a fairy tale. Well, there's quite a few fairy tales. They're called different things. In my book, I call it fur-skin, but in German, it's called Ala Rao, of many different types of fur. And let me see, 1 second. And this is a story. Well, thank you, Selena. This is a story about we women today, okay? Because now more than ever, we are very much attuned to the masculine energy. We've been trained, we go out into the world. The early feminists, I think one of the issues that I always had with them is they wanted equality with men, but then when we went into the world, we had to act like men. And that didn't work out so good because we'll always be second-class men. So this is a story about how we reclaim our sovereignty for ourselves. So this is the story of Ala Rao. Once upon a time, there was a king whose queen was the most beautiful woman in the whole world. Besides the grace of her form and face, she had the most beautiful golden hair. Now, their love was legendary, and even the birth of a daughter paled beside their obsessive love. But as time went on, no one really knew what happened, but it came to pass that the queen grew ill. And as she lay dying, she called the king to come to her for one last time. And she looked him in the eye and demanded that he make her a promise. And since he loved her beyond all measure, he agreed to do whatever she wanted from him. And this is what she told him. When you marry again after my death, you must find someone who is just as beautiful as I am. And she must have the same golden hair. Now, you have to promise me that you'll do this. Well, the king, he protested. He never wanted to marry again, but the queen insisted. And so when the king finally gave her his promise, she closed her eyes and died. For a long time, the king would not be comforted and gave no thought to taking another wife. But finally, his counselors insisted that the country needed a new queen. That's when he remembered his promise. And he said that he could only marry someone who was as beautiful as the late queen. But although there were many beautiful women who were fit to be queen, they didn't have the same golden hair. Now, the king's daughter had grown up quite alone, basically ignored by it because of her parents' obsessive love for each other, and then because of her father's grief. Now, this princess was just as beautiful as her dead mother, and she had the same golden hair. And one day the king finally noticed her, and he saw that in every respect, she was like his late wife. And suddenly he fell violently in love with her. He was determined to marry his own daughter. And although it went against all the laws of nature, the king would not be dissuaded. Well, the princess was shocked when she became aware of her father's desire, but hoped to turn him from it. She said, "Before I fulfill your wish, you have to do something for me. I must have 3 dresses. One as golden as the sun, one as silvery as the moon, and one as bright as the stars. And besides this, I wish for a mantle of fur, making use of having a bit of a piece of a skin from every animal in your kingdom." Now, when she thought this was going to be quite impossible for her father to do and that she would get out of this mess. But the king, however, had the cleverest maidens in his kingdom weave the 3 dresses. And he had his huntsmen catch one of every kind of animal in the whole of his kingdom. And they took a piece of its skin, and out of it, they made a mantle of different kinds of fur. And then when they were done, the king brought the dresses and the mantle to his daughter and set the wedding for the next day. When the king's daughter saw there was no hope of changing her father's mind, she resolved to run away. So that night she gathered her 3 treasures, a golden ring, a golden spinning wheel, and a golden reel. And she put the 3 dresses of the sun, the moon, and the stars in a nutshell. And then she put on her furry mantle and blackened her face and hands with soot and left the castle. She walked the whole night until she reached a great forest. And because she was tired, she hid in a hollow tree and fell asleep. Now the sun rose and she was still sleeping when it was full day. So she didn't hear the hunt, which was led by a new king, a different king who owned that forest. And when his dogs came to the tree, they sniffed and barked. And the king said to his huntsman, "Go see what wild beast is hidden there." And the huntsman obeyed his orders. And when they came back, they told him there was this wondrous beast lying asleep in the hollow tree, one whose hide they had never seen before. And so the king told them, "Catch it alive and bring it to the carriage," and they would take it with them. So when the huntsman laid hold of the princess, she woke up full of terror. They were amazed to hear her speak, and they asked who she was. She said, "I am a poor child deserted by both father and mother," and asked them, "Please have pity on me and take me with you." And so they called her Furskin, or Ala Rao, and told her that she would be useful in the kitchen where she could sweep up the ashes. Then they put her in the carriage and they took her to the royal palace. And there they showed her a closet under the stairs where no daylight entered. And they told her she could live and sleep there, sort of like Harry Potter when he was living with his relatives, the Diggers. And so then she was sent to the kitchen, and there she carried wood and water, and then she swept out the hearth and plucked the fowls and picked the vegetables and raked out the ashes and basically did all the dirty work. Now, she lived there for a long time in great wretchedness until one day the king decided to hold a feast. And she asked the cook if she could go upstairs for a while and look at it. And she promised she would just stand outside the door where no one would see her. And so the cook gave her permission, but said, be back in a half an hour because you have to sweep up the hearth. So she took her oil lamp and went to her dark little den, and she took off her dress of fur and she washed the soot off her hands and face so that her full beauty once more came to light. And she opened up the nut and put on the dress that shone like the sun, and she went up to the ball. Well, everyone made way for her because no one knew who she was, but she certainly looked like a princess. And the king came to meet her, and he danced with her and thought in his heart that he had never seen anyone so beautiful. Now, when the dance was over, she curtsied, and when the king looked around again, she had vanished, and no one could say where she'd gone. Well, she'd run back to her den and taken off her dress and blackened her face and hands and put on the mantle of fur. And then when she went to the kitchen, the cook said, well, look, I'm going to go up and look at the dancing, and why don't you make the soup for the king? So the princess made bread soup, which is so interesting because I found that when I lived in Switzerland, they have bread soup. And my Hungarian grandmother used to make Kimmel soup, which is bread soup. Well, anyway, she made it for the king. And when it was ready, she took her golden ring from her den and she put it in the bowl with the soup. So when the dancing was over and the king had his soup and he ate it, he liked it so much. He thought he'd never tasted better soup. But he came to the bottom of the bowl and he saw the golden ring and he wondered, how did it get there? So he called the cook. And the cook said, if you have let any hair fall into the soup, I'm going to beat you. Well, when he went up to the king and the king asked him who made the soup, he lied and he said he did. But the king said, no, that couldn't be true because it's different. And so the cook had to admit it was Ala Rao. And the king sent for her. And when she came, the king said, well, who are you? She replied, well, I'm just a poor girl who no longer has any mother or father. And the king pushed again and said, well, what use are you in my palace? And this is important for us women. She said, I'm good for nothing but to have boots thrown at my head. And then he said, where did you get the ring that was in the soup? And she said, I don't know anything about the ring. And so since the king couldn't get her to answer, he sent her away. And after a while, there was another festival. And once again, she begged the cook to leave and look on. And he said, okay, but you have to come back and make the king the bread soup. So when she ran to her den, she washed herself quickly and she put on her dress that was as silvery as the moon. And of course, she looked like a princess and the king was glad. She stepped forward and they danced. But when it ended, once again, she disappeared. She went to her den, took off her dress, came back in her hairy outfit and made the soup. And this time when she made the soup, she put the golden spinning wheel in it. And once again, the king asked who made it, and the cook lied and then sent Ala Rao up. And the king asked her the questions again, but she just replied that she knew nothing. And so for a third time, the king held a ball. And when Ala Rao asked to go to the ball, the cook said, which is so typical, you must be a witch because you always put something in the soup that makes it so good that the king likes it better than the soup I cook. But he did let her go up. And so she put on the dress that shone like the stars and entered the hall. Again, the king danced with this beautiful maiden and thought that she looked even more beautiful than before. Now, he finally caught on to what she was up to, and he gave orders that the dance should last a very long time. And while they were dancing, he slipped a golden ring on her finger without her noticing. Probably the same golden ring she had given him earlier. Now, when the dance ended, he held onto her hands, but she sprang away because she'd been way over that half hour she had promised the cook. So when she got to her little den, she didn't have time to take off her dress, but she just covered it with her fur cloak. And she didn't quite blacken her hand and her face. And she hurried to the kitchen and cooked the bread soup for the king. And she put her golden reel in it. And so when the king found the reel, he summoned her. And he saw that one of her fingers was white, and the ring that he had given it, put on her while they were dancing, was there. And so he grasped her hand and held her fast. And when she tried to run away, her mantle of fur opened a little, and the star dress shone through. And the king took that mantle and tore it off. And then her golden hair shone forth, and she stood there in full splendor and could no longer hide herself. When she had washed the soot and ashes from her face and hands, she was more beautiful than anyone who had ever been seen on earth. And the king asked her to marry him, and she agreed, for he was the king of her desire. Now, that's a pretty heavy fairy tale. And once again, I interpret it in my book, Wisdom's Daughters. But what it is, it's the story of how patriarchy, every time a new feeling, because the feminine represents that feeling tone of a culture. And when a queen dies, it means the feeling tone is no longer behind there. So it would be like the king would represent, let's say, Christianity. And when the queen dies, that's the feeling, people leave the church. Or capitalism, the king might represent a cultural dominant like capitalism. And when we don't believe it anymore, that means the queen, the feeling tone has died. And so this is very much a story about how the father wants to take over, or the father culture wants to take over all the new life that comes into being. And we see that all the time. We see how all the energy companies became environmentalists, supposedly. They take that new feeling tone that we all have and run with it, but it belongs to them. And this is the fairy tale, especially important for all of us women, because we need to let go of the father's rules. You know, we need to find our own inner masculine, which is kind of wild. Okay, and it's untamed. And just like Dame Ragnall, sometimes we feel ugly when we do what we do. But it's the only way that we can truly integrate all of the wisdom that our culture has. That dress of the sun, our ego consciousness has to change. We don't have to buy into the rules of our culture, which is disintegrating after anyway. We have to stop using our imagination, the dress of the moon, to sell things, okay? And we have to come back and use our imagination to speak with nature, to find out what we need to know, to listen to our hearts. And we certainly have to dress in our own spiritual vision rather than what patriarchy might demand of us. So anyway, I don't know quite what time it is, so I might not tell this story, but Venus is really the Roman configuration of the goddess Aphrodite, who was also in ancient times the goddess Inanna and Astarte. But it was the Greeks who told the story. Psyche means soul. And there's a beautiful story, which I don't know if we have time for me to tell, but it's about the how we have to grow our soul. And Venus, Aphrodite, is our initiator. And 1 second, let me see how we're doing on time. Okay, so if you're not bored, we still have time. So I'm going to tell you quickly the story of Psyche and Eros. One day in ancient Greece, or sometime, there was a king and a queen who had 3 daughters. And the 2 daughters were wonderful, but the youngest daughter, Psyche, was so beautiful that people started worshiping her instead of Aphrodite. They stopped going to Aphrodite's temples, but they went and they would just stare at her as she went out into the streets. And when Aphrodite heard of this, she was furious. And so she called her son Eros, which sometimes we know as Cupid, but that's sort of really downgrading who Eros was. Eros is the great god of desire. And called him and said, I want you to go and make this girl fall in love with the worst beast that you can find. Now, her father, because the two older daughters had suitors and they got married, but no one would come and ask for Psyche's hand. She was so beautiful. And so her parents went to the Oracle of Delphi and they basically said, well, you have to put her up on a mountain because she has to marry, she's going to die. And so she has to marry death. So they bring her up to the mountain and leave her there. They used to chain maidens all over the place in ancient times, and so monsters could come eat them. It's not a very nice thing that the Greeks did. But anyway, meanwhile, Eros comes and he falls in love with her. So he takes her to his secret castle. And there he makes love with her, but only in the dark. And he says, you can't see who I am. But she's content because he's a great lover. And in the day, she has this magical palace where invisible helpers give her anything she wants. It's Beauty and the Beast is sort of is a reiteration of this myth in many ways. But anyway, but her sisters come to the mountain and they mourn for her. And she feels so bad. She says to her lover at night, can I please see my sisters? Finally, he gives in and he says, but watch out, they're gonna cause trouble, which of course they did because they were so jealous of the palace that she lived in. And they would ask her, well, what's your husband like? And the first time she said, well, he's an older guy and a merchant. He's away right now. But that's why we have such a beautiful palace. And they went away and she gave them a lot of jewels, but they couldn't believe, they just were so jealous. How come she gets this and not us? So they come back and this time she says, oh, he's this young, cute shepherd. He's out in the hills. And they go, okay, something's really wrong here. And so finally they say to her, look, you might be married to a monster, to a beast, because they find out she doesn't know what he looks like. And so they tell her, take a knife and take a light and take a look. So that night after they make love and Eros is asleep, Psyche sneaks out of bed and lights a lamp and takes up the knife and goes to look at him. But as she walks, she scratches herself on one of his arrows and she falls in love, with desire. And when she sees him, she's so overwhelmed that she bends a little and the oil from the lamp gets on him and burns his shoulder. And he wakes up and he says, oh, Psyche, you've wrecked everything. I have to go now. And he leaves and his palace disappears. And Psyche's left pregnant all by herself. Well, she wanders around, but none of the goddesses will help her because they're afraid of Aphrodite's wrath. So finally she goes to Aphrodite. And Aphrodite says, okay, you wretched girl, I have some tasks for you. And this is the great initiation. In the story, of course, they made Aphrodite jealous, but that's how initiations go. You have to meet the monster in some ways. So the first task was Aphrodite threw all sorts of seeds and beans on the ground and says, separate them out before I come back in the morning from this wedding I'm going to. And of course, Psyche just cries and breaks down, but all these ants come and they feel so sorry for her that the little ants separate out the seeds. And so she's passed the first test. And then Aphrodite says, okay, now today I want you to go collect the wool, the golden wool from the rams of the sun. If you don't, I'm going to kill you. So Psyche heads off and she starts to cry. She says, I can't do this. And as she's crying by a stream, a reed says to her, look, this is what you need to do. Wait till after they run around this morning because they're very intense and rambunctious and they're fighting each other. But wait till afterwards when they, later in the afternoon when they start to quiet down and go to sleep. And then go down and grab all the wool that's on all the briars on the branches of the bushes. And that's what Psyche does. And so she has the basket of golden wool that she can give Aphrodite. So Aphrodite, very annoyed, says, okay, the third task is get me some water from the spring at the head of the river Styx, okay, which is the river that goes into the underworld. And Psyche, of course, is totally in despair. She thinks, how will I ever do it? But Zeus's eagle happened to be flying by, and when he found out what she needed, he went up and took the pitcher, and he dipped down between the two dragons that were guarding the well, and he filled the pitcher with the water of the river. And so finally, Aphrodite says, okay, the last test. And this is what I think goes along with this Venus retrograde going into the underworld. She says, I need you to go into the underworld and get from Persephone, the queen of the underworld, some beauty. Now, Psyche's in despair, and she goes to a tower, and she's going to just throw herself off of it. And she figures, if I have to go to the underworld, I guess I have to die. But the tower speaks to her and says, look, this is what you need to do. When you go down into the underworld, people are going to try to ask you for help. You have to ignore them. People that you know and love are going to ask you for help, but you can't give them any pity. Just go down and get the box of beauty. Don't look at it, come back. And so she does. She doesn't answer the pleas of the people calling to her. She doesn't eat any food in the underworld. And she brings back a box of beauty. But by now she's so tired and she feels so bedraggled that she thinks, well, if there's beauty here, maybe I can have a little of it, and maybe Eros will come back and love me. But when she opens the box, sleep comes out and covers her, and she falls into a deep sleep. But meanwhile, Eros has recovered from his wound and he's been hanging out at his mom's house, and he goes to find her, and he takes the sleep off of her and puts it back in the box, and they go back into Olympus, and finally they marry each other. And the child that Psyche is pregnant with is called Bliss. So 3 stories that really speak to different ways that Venus can help us find our sovereignty, help us leave the Father's house, and also reconnect with what we truly desire. Here is the last story that I want to tell. And it's about the woman clothed with the sun, who is the image of the solar feminine. Now, we are living in transformational times, and there's so many stories out there from many traditions about the changing of the ages. But the only story that Western Christianity has about the changing of the ages is about the end times. Because Christians are the only, this Christian story is the only one that says only certain people are going to be saved, because they have that whole chosen thing going on. The chosen people from the Jewish religion, only Christians are good from the Christian religion, only Muslims are good from Islam. It's the religions of the book have a chosen thing going on, Any other culture, if you listen to the Hopis and any other cultural story of the changing of the ages, is we're all going through this together. But the Christian end time story, unfortunately, has been in our collective unconscious for 2 millennia, okay? Ever since it was written. Even if you're not Christian anymore, your ancestors heard about how the end times were going to kill us all, and only the Christians and the good people are going to be saved. And so it's in our unconscious, even if you don't go to church. And so, and especially the evangelical Christians are really into this. They're pretty sure we're at the end times. And, the story is basically, while most Christians read it as, a condemnation of everybody else but them, it's really a condemnation about what Christianity has done to our culture in our world. And the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, death, famine, war, whatever, I forget the last one right now. That's what Christianity, in a way, because it's the Christian mindset along with capitalism that really has created the mess we're in. There it is. But what the Christians don't ever talk about is this one part of the book of Revelations that changes everything. And it's this. says, now a great portent appeared in the heavens, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and in labor, crying aloud in the pangs of childbirth, and she gives birth to the Savior. Now, this is an image of the divine feminine giving birth to the new age. And in the story, the dragon of the old unconsciousness chases her away into the desert, where she gets the wings of an eagle. But she does, and because of her giving birth, the whole story changes and a new heaven and earth come. And this is interesting because it's a woman clothed with the sun. She's also a goddess. But I think of everything, she's Mother Earth. I think that back in the late 60s, when we saw the earth from the moon, everything changed. That's when all the goddess religion came to the fore. Many people wrote about the divine feminine. And of course, she went underground for a long time, but she's back. She's back in all of us. And I think the main thing I want to get across is that it really is up to we women to stand up for the world, just as the Native American women were the ones who stood up against the Keystone oil pipeline, and the men came and protected them. I think it's up to us to say we demand different values. And I know it might sound politically incorrect because, of course, men have the divine feminine, they have right brain thinking in them too, but it's women. And it's our power, and we're coming back as we leave the Father's house, as we regain our own sense of sovereignty, as we find our own king, the masculine way of being in the world. We are the grandmothers of the future, and it's up to us to step forward and help save our beautiful world. This is a book I read, which is kind of interesting. He was a professor of the history of religions, and he took a whole lot of LSD over the course of about 20 years because he wanted to meet the source of life. And he did. He went through a lot of interesting things. He basically found out that the creatrix was the goddess, not a god. But this is what he said: the intelligence of the universe is working systematically to bring our entire species into a new chapter of its life. The entire human family integrated in a unified field of awareness. The species reconnected to its fundamental nature. Our thoughts are attuned to source consciousness. After an arduous process of shedding our past, a quickening of the human spirit takes place, marked by new ways of thinking, new values, new priorities, new perceptions of the good, new truth. And this is the interesting thing. It says the cycle of reincarnation comes to a crescendo that lifts the human experience to a higher register. Just as young souls become old souls will become complete souls, and all our former lifetimes will be redeemed and let go of. What a wonderful, wonderful idea. What a wonderful future. And here's another man. So after I said women were going to be the ones, here's the men talking. This is from D.H. Lawrence. We have lost the cosmos. The sun strengthens us no more. Neither does the moon. Now we have to get back the cosmos, and it can't be done by a trick. The great range of responses that have fallen dead in us have to come to life again. It has taken 2,000 years to kill them off. Who knows how long it will take to bring them back to life? When I hear modern people complain of being lonely, then I know what has happened. They've lost the cosmos. It is nothing human and personal that we're short of. What we lack is cosmic life. The sun is in us and the moon is in us. And I would add, the stars are in us. So here's my storytelling. This is something that I think is so important as we can align, if we can align ourselves with the cosmic energy, we get energized. We can incarnate the universe. I think the cosmos, the source, the great goddess, the great God, they want us to achieve, they want good things for us. I don't know how we ended up with over 2,000 years of a religion that basically said we're evil and that we're going to die and burn in hell. It must have been something that the human race needed to go through, but I think it's over now. And I think as we head into a new age, those are the things we have to drop. And we have to bring all of those cosmic energies back into us. In ancient times, when you worshiped a god or a goddess, you lived in their world, just as we've lived in the Christian world. Now, this isn't to say that Jesus wasn't a good guy and he didn't have a lot to say, but the Roman Empire kind of took over his religion. So we've been living under that more than the religious outlook that he talked about, because he did talk about love. And Sophia, his consort, is about embodied wisdom. And so if we step into Aphrodite or Venus's world, it's a world of beauty and harmony. It comes from the heart. It's artistic. It's about values. It's definitely about worth, and it's about our self-worth. As Jesus himself said, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, but love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we've done a pretty piss poor job of loving our neighbors because we don't love ourselves. And if we really loved ourselves, we would love the whole world and we'd love each other more. So anyway, stories of Venus retrograde in Capricorn. I hope you enjoyed them. You can find me at kathypagano.com. If you want to learn more about Venus and also the woman clothed with the sun, my book, Wisdom's Daughters, How Women Can Change the World, is out there in Amazon country, if you will. And also some of you know that I've been thinking about doing some storytelling called Grandma Cat's Bedtime Stories for the Soul. I'm not quite sure where I'm going to be doing it yet. I think so far it's going to be on YouTube. And my YouTube channel is The Cosmic Storyteller. Okay. So we'll stop the share. And if anyone wants to ask questions or come on, you can turn on your video, you can unmute yourself. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. Otherwise, we will adjourn for the day, and I'd like you just to really let those stories sink into you, and work on your imagination. Just like dreams, they come to us as the stories of our soul. And if we work with them, if we sit in their images, they speak to us. Imaginal consciousness is goddess consciousness. The imagination is where we create things. And if we're going to grow into the woman clothed with the sun, which I think all of us women are, then we need to base our consciousness. We have to trust our hearts. But she's clothed with the sun, which also means we need our masculine rational side. We got the delusional story, and once again, no offense to people, but we got a delusional guy named Abraham who thought God told him to go kill his son, and he was going to do it until the last minute. Okay, so sometimes people's unconscious is a little crazy. And so always check in with yourself with whatever your imagination tells you, okay, because it has to be in alignment with your values. Okay, so no listening to stories about going and killing your firstborn so that God will be happy. Okay, the goddess doesn't do that. Just as well as it's not a sin. So many things that we've been told are sins, those were men saying that. I tease my friends, my male friends, who go, God says that's a sin. And I go, no, men said it, that's a sin. The goddess doesn't call it a sin. Okay. So I see a whole bunch of things on the side, but I'm going to check, yeah, definitely. I'm going to turn it into a YouTube and put it out. And if you're on my mailing list, I will send out, but look up the Cosmic Storyteller, Kathy Pagano, it's someplace there. I'm not great at all the technology, so you might have to look for it. Anyway, any questions before I finish?
Yeah, Kathy, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. And you're right, there's so much information in there. I have to kind of chew it over. Definitely agree with everything you said and brought up. I guess my question is, as we are changing, as women need to reawaken their own consciousness, and I think men are struggling with the change of women, and they're kind of left out in the cold, not knowing what to do. So I think like it's a collective thing. Also, I think men of our generation and older are thinking differently than this new generation coming up. I mean, we're not, they're not even called men or women now. They like to be called they or them, which brings up a whole nother question in itself, is how do we identify ourselves? So, yeah, I'm not quite sure what my question is, but I'm just curious what you thought about that. And I know we have to all get in touch with our masculine side as women, and men have to get in touch with their female side. And like, so as we grow, will that consciousness happen for men? I think men are very confused, and I think that's why they're so angry too. I find, especially older men,
Yes.
just really angry, and they're
Yeah.
getting a bad rap now. And especially if you're a white man, an older white man's really getting a bad rap. But I think they're just so confused. I don't know if they even know their place. So I'm just curious what you thought.
Right. Well, no, that's totally true. And as we live it, we have to exemplify love and connection and teach them. Okay. I have 3 sons, and I always tease them when they get me. And I say, you guys, like a dog, you need to be trained. It's not a bad thing. Dogs are wonderful, but dogs need training to be a good dog. Cats, you can never train, and they're like women. So we have that wildness in us. But instead of using the word train, we have to be examples. As we incarnate the woman clothed with the sun, our men will love that, and they'll begin to listen. We can't leave them behind. I have 3 sons. I'm not leaving any of them behind. But we can't stop being this we can't stop ourselves from exemplifying the woman clothed with the sun. Okay. So we don't hurt them. What we have to do is we have to be so centered that we don't do it in a hurtful way. And of course, and the more that, I was married to an Episcopal priest, so I went to seminary for a long time with him, because we went for a long time. But like the early Christians, it took a while, and it was so many of the early Christians were women, for the society to change the way they acted, to bring it in. But supposedly from this crazy guy who did all the LSD, what he's learned, at least from talking to the universe in his own way, is that it's going to happen quicker. It's going to turn over quicker, that the collective unconscious is going to sort of bring this new thing in. So it really depends. You see, the other side is feminine consciousness says we're all connected. So the more that we connect to our own feminine wisdom, it goes out into the spider webs. It's sort of like Indra's net. We're all connected. And so we can do things in the background. It isn't just that we have to go and take over our town council, which some people need to do, and and go out and be in our community, which we all need to do, but we have to live it. We have to embody it. And when we embody it, it goes out, and then we have to trust that. I think. I don't know. Anybody else want to bring a comment on it? Because this is just me. I'm not saying I'm right, but this is what I've come up with from all these years that I've been studying this. Anybody?
I feel like I'm still I'm always trying to stay aware of when my training of my youth gets me to shut up and learning. And I think I'm growing in that way, but it's like always having to remind myself, no, your view is important. The world needs my view, as an individual and as a woman. But I do feel like that the old training and conditioning has held me back for many years. I don't know, somehow I was getting older. It's a little easier to say, screw that. and step forward. But
one of the things I always heard was that it's our throat chakra that we have to work on, women, because we've been silenced.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We can't forget that, 400 or 500 years ago, they burned a bunch of women as witches because they didn't want our knowledge there anymore. The church said you can beat your wife within an inch because you could hit her with an inch thick stick. I mean, it was awful what happened. Okay. And after that, everybody shut down. Why would you, if you had any knowledge, you'd pass it down in secret.
Yeah.
But now all of that knowledge is coming back. So part of it is I tell stories because stories can expand you. So when you're afraid to say something, you might go, oh, I have to be the woman clothed with the sun. Hold it. Or you might say, this is me in my mantle of fur, okay, working away. Because for years, as I tried to get conscious, this is the story that helped me. I went, oh my God, I'm working in the kitchen in my mantle of fur. I have to learn something, right?
Yeah.
But then you come out, as we learn it, we bring out a new vision of who we can be. We bring out a new way to use the imagination, which is let's connect to each other on the internet. We've all been practicing, right? Being psychic. Who's on the phone before we answer? I mean, we've done this for years, and it's a new way to use the imagination. Years ago, when I was raising 4 kids on my own, and I didn't have a lot of money because my ex-husband wasn't paying me, and I had 4 kids, I couldn't work full time or they'd kill each other. I had to listen to my imagination. Nobody liked it. Right. I mean, I had to listen to what my dreams were telling me, which was don't go to work. I even had a dream that said, don't go to work. And, okay, why am I telling you this? There was a reason. I did that old person thing. I just lost the whole train of thought. What were you talking about before we started?
Speaking up for yourself.
Speaking up for myself. Okay, I can't remember. But anyway, it's hard. It's hard to not do the regular thing. It's hard not to go and be that person. And so we have to learn. And at first, sometimes it comes out harsh because we've repressed it. I certainly was harsh, okay, with my ex-husband sometimes because I didn't know how to express myself, and he could always twist things around and get to me. And so I had to learn how to speak my truth. And I often do it because I have an image, and then from the image, I know what I need to say. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Because I didn't have a lot of money, my friends, when they heard I was a dream therapist and good with symbols, they said, you should go work in advertising. You'd be great. And I thought, I will never use my talent to sell junk to people they don't need. Junk that they don't need to people, okay? And, so it's about our values and our priorities. Do you use your gifts and talents to feed a machine that is negative rather than to have the rewards of that machine? And that's hard.
Yeah.
Because we were brought up to say the machine is important and those rewards are important, and you might die if you don't have them, or at least you're a sinner, the old Protestant work ethic. If you're wealthy, God loves you, but if you're poor, you're a sinner. That's why people work so hard in America, because we were founded during the Industrial Revolution, and we're the most corporate state in the world. And the whole thing with America is pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work hard. We don't have those deep roots that the native peoples and that other people who live in back in the old world where we all came from, we don't have those deep roots. So we have to root ourselves, we women. Birth is always a feminine project, if you will. Okay. The masculine does not birth things. The feminine has to be the foundation. So if we aren't the foundation of a new society, it's not going to happen.
I would love to chime in here, if
Hi,
that's okay. Hi. So this brings up so many things that are on theme lately. I spent about an hour and a half speaking with a dear friend of mine last night about this grind culture that we're in, and I journaled about how it was birthed through really the Industrial Revolution. So this is such a prominent theme, and I think as we are moving into this age of grandmother wisdom, this Capricorn cycle, this council of grandmothers, it couldn't be more important. And what I was trying to put in the chat, which auto corrected and got weird, but I was trying to speak to the idea of training versus entrainment, and how entrainment is really what happens when our heart's toroidal field impacts other hearts, and it really is truly through the embodiment and just being what we know to be true that's going to make the change. That's how we give birth, as we step forward and we bravely not do, and we don't participate in the grind culture, and we dismantle it by the way that we move through the world and create trust and create community and lead each other because we're leading ourselves. I don't know if any of that made sense, because I'm really just channeling it from my heart.
It totally made sense. And you see, it's magic, isn't it?
Yes.
To say, if I embody it, I can affect other people. And what did patriarchy do? They got rid of magic. Yeah. Right? And I love my sons, but they don't trust my magic. Okay. Yeah. It's like I want to shake them. Like, it's interesting. They'll listen to their dreams, because I'm a dream therapist, and we talked about it when they were little. They'll even do tarot readings. If I do astrology, one son, my Aries son, goes, "The stars don't tell me what to do." And it's like, that's not what astrology is. So part of it is, it's the reimagining and the reawakening of the magical world again. And we will create it, but we have to not be afraid. We have to, the inner masculine, you see, when we say we have to, balance our masculine and feminine, we can't let it be the patriarchal masculine. We have to find the God of the earth, the God, the king of the forest, for Ala Rao. It's our wild masculine side that is needed.
The solar feminine. Yeah.
The solar feminine. I mean, when I'm wearing my priestess shawl that I got when I was initiated as a priestess of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of Egypt. She was a sun goddess. Carl Jung talked about the fact that that Nut was the sky goddess and Geb was the earth goddess, and he said it must have been a different kind of ego consciousness. And I never thought of that before I read that. And the thing is, we think ego consciousness is what we have, ego consciousness, but it's a very masculine sense of ego. We need the ego. That guy that said, get rid of the ego, he needed to talk to men, not to women. We need an ego. It's just our center of consciousness. But if we connect our ego to ourself, our soul, then we're acting in the right way, right? The masculine consciousness is disconnect from the soul, just do what the culture says to do. So we can't go to that masculine energy anymore. We have to let that die. And the only way we can birth a new masculine energy is to birth it, to be it. Right? Our doing has to come out of our being. you know, and we have to realize that we might be ugly. You know, there's a lot of Celtic stories about sovereignty. The Irish, the Welsh, they all have it, and it's all about how the up and coming king meets a hag, and she wants to be kissed, and the only one that gets to be king is the one who goes, sure, I'll kiss you, because it's going to be hard. It's not going to be airy fairy easy the next few years. You know, we have to face the hard parts of life, and Americans have a hard time with that because we have a pretty easy life compared to the rest of the world. We're not being raped and pillaged or bombed, or you know, we're not on we're not migrants trying to get to some kind of safety. We're pretty, as my son tells me, even though, Mom, you don't have any money, you're still the 0.1% of wealthy people in the world. You have food, you have shelter, you have, you know, you make a little money. You might not be a millionaire, or you might not have a lot of money to retire with, but we're pretty good. We're pretty solid. And if we don't do it, like the Dalai Lama said, it's Western women who will change the world. We're the ones who have to start, you know, speaking our truth and living our truth and embodying it, I would say.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was doing the research between the difference between Aphrodite and Venus, especially in regards to Venus, the planet, and astrology and all that stuff. And I came upon someone saying that Aphrodite, one of her powers was the ability to take two disparate opposing forces and find harmony, or bring harmony to the opposing disparate forces. And I was wondering, one, if you could address the difference between Venus, the planet, and all that stuff going on, and Aphrodite, and how they're connected, and or any of that.
Well, I would say if you really want to buy my book, which I haven't tried to sell, it's been out since 2013, and I haven't even really said you have to buy my book, but I talk about all that. But anyway, okay. Aphrodite, you know, the Romans took all the Greek gods basically, and they really just focused them on certain things. But Aphrodite originally comes from the Middle Eastern goddesses like Inanna and Astarte, but she's like in the creation story, the Greek creation story, she gets born out of the sea when the phallus of Uranus is dumped into the ocean, the primal ocean. She is heaven's answer to us. Love, right? She said, it's like, this is your reason for being, love. Okay, right? And so, so the planet, of course, if you study astrology, the Mayans had a lot of different types of love. You know, one of the troubles with our culture is that in the Middle Ages, Eleanor of Aquitaine started something called the Courts of Love. It's kind of to train the knights to be courteous, to love ladies, you know, and it was that whole courtly love romance, which Tristan and Isolde and Romeo and Juliet came out of. So we have this idea of romantic love. That's like when we meet somebody, it has to be that, or it's not real. But Aphrodite was much bigger than that. She comprised all sorts of love, okay? Like when she made love, she went and had a bath and she was virginal again. So, you know what I mean? It's sort of like we were kidding about this the other day, love the one you're with. But the old hippie creed, but that's what happened, unfortunately, in my generation in the 60s and 70s. Women said, oh, sure, we can just make love with anyone. But it was like men do, you know, and men don't have that discernment. And then women went, no, this isn't any good. This is my body that's being invaded. So it's really the most important thing I could say about Venus and about Aphrodite is we have to be embodied. That's where our wisdom is. If we listen to our bodies, okay, we will find, if we listen to our imaginations, we will find the wisdom that we need. So I don't know, like right now, how I would tie in more Venus, because, you know, Venus in the sky, you know, when you talk to an astrologer, they might talk about your relationships, they might talk about money, right? But she's so much more. And that's why I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to say,
Mhm.
embody a story rather than just, oh, this is about money or this is about my relationships. Because not everybody's in a relationship. You know, we all have people that we're relating to, but not everybody is in that kind of romantic relationship. And it's how we connect. Venus is the great connector, right?
Mhm.
So that's the part that I think is important. And when the stars, when the planets move through the skies and affect us, when we're conscious of what they're doing, then we can use that consciousness to make our lives easier, or ride the energy, you could say.
Mhm.
You know?
Right. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
definitely get your book.
I feel silly advertising it. There's, you know, not
Oh, it's
silly.
great.
I'm not a salesperson, but yeah, it has all this information plus tons more in it.
Mhm. Great. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. I always
you, Kathy.
appreciate it
This
when
is
people show up.
fabulous.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you,
Okay.
Kathy.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.